Tackling safety-related compliance on top of the day-to-day of HR is incredibly intimidating, and especially within these shift-based industries where accidents happen more often than not. Today, I am joined with Liz Petersen. She is SHRM's quality manager, and we're going to talk about what OSHA laws shift-based businesses should know, how to get frontline workers to follow said OSHA laws, and how to keep accurate records and incident reports. Let's get right into it. Hello, everybody. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to prevent OSHA lawsuits. First and foremost, to give a little background on workforce.com, Workforce is a full service HCM software company that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. So think everything from scheduling to payroll, time and attendance, HRIS, and so much more. We work with these hourly wage companies across states and help each one automate their compliance across teams. Because of this, we're able to see the before and after and what a strong OSHA compliant organization looks like, and help share some actionable solutions to help other business get to that place with or without HR software. I am joined by a very special guest today, Liz Petersen. She is a quality manager at SHRM. Liz, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Meredith.
Of course. Liz has over 25 years of HR experience and the SHRM Senior Professional Certification. Prior to SHRM, Liz worked as an outsourced HR manager for several small and medium-sized organizations in multiple industries, including technology, engineering, hospitality, retail, service, construction, healthcare, and manufacturing, and so forth. She has also worked as an in-house HR manager and director in the manufacturing industry. So, Liz, you are a perfect candidate for this topic. Obviously, manufacturing is huge on the OSHA side of things. So we'll get right into it. First and foremost, I would love for you to tell me about some of the work you do at SHRM's HR Knowledge Center and your role as a quality manager.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
So at SHRM, we are the, I'm sorry, let me start over. Starting already. Okay. SHRM is the, well, hold on. Let me just get up here. Let me do my thing.
All good.
Okay. Thank you, Meredith. SHRM, or the Society for Human Resource Management, is the largest HR professional association worldwide. SHRM members include, membership includes the Ask an Advisor service, which is run by our HR Knowledge Center, and that's where I'm the quality manager. Our members contact the knowledge advisors for assistance with their most perplexing HR questions, and our knowledge advisors handle about 60,000 member inquiries a year. As a quality manager, my focus is on developing the knowledge advisors, and we strive to provide that exceptional service along with expert knowledge and resources to support the handling of those really tough questions.
Nice. I'm kind of touched on this earlier during the introduction. What has your experience been with shift-based industries and OSHA compliance? I know it kind of spans across some of those industries that we already covered.
Right. Yeah. As you mentioned, I've worked in manufacturing, healthcare, hospitality, service industries. So really, I've done the gamut. So everything from creating safety plans, incident response procedures, helping create those safety committees when they want them, safety trainings, doing them, creating them, helping being more creative and implementing those types of trainings, conducting assessment audits, as well as investigating safety instances, administering workers' comp, which is not necessarily OSHA, but very, very related, and then prepping for those OSHA inspections, as well as responding to citations. So a pretty wide range of the OSHA piece.
Absolutely. And in terms of the biggest misconception, or maybe even the biggest mistake, what do you think HR, what's their biggest mistake surrounding OSHA compliance when it comes to, maintaining very, very tight-knit compliance protocols within their organization?
I think the biggest oversight might be their misunderstanding of just how OSHA applies to their organization. So first of all, I just want to clarify that OSHA, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and also the Occupational Safety and Health Act standards are both referred to as OSHA. So we might be saying OSHA for both things, and that's kind of
that's a great
interchangeable.
Yeah.
But employers often consider OSHA compliance for a portion of their workforce or work site rather than looking at it holistically. And that can be, they can focus really on, maybe they have a manufacturing in a very safety sensitive area, and they'll focus their safety protocols there, and they might not look at all the issues that might be impacting the workforce. They may also miss training their different shifts. They might miss training their temporary workers. They need to think about remote workers as well and what they're doing. So there's also part-time workers that might miss the training because they don't come in till later or start their shift earlier. So there's definitely concerns in missing the particular work groups as well as functions of the location.
Absolutely. It's a very important clarification, and it feeds me perfectly into this next part of the webinar, talking about what OSHA laws shift-based businesses should know to begin with, right? So I want to first point to this very first slide that we've got here on the ins and outs of OSHA. So talking, kind of highlighting some of these bullet points: safety rules and regulations apply to all workers, regardless of their work. Shift workers must receive all OSHA mandated safety training. I think this is a very important topic we'll kind of dive into a little bit more later. They must be required and provided with all the necessary PPE. They must have access to safety information, inspected, maintained for safety hazards, required medical examinations. I think that's a really important one as well. And then finally, they must have access to emergency first aid treatment, supplies, and equipment. So my question for you is, how can you highlight some of the key OSHA regulations that are particularly relevant within these shift-based industries? I think that there's so many to feel like that you need to keep track of. Are there any that you can narrow down or highlight?
I would say probably the injury and illness record keeping is probably going to be a big one to make sure that they're focusing on. That usually can be something that can be overlooked, or incidents aren't reported. PPE, as well as their forklift training. HAZCOM is often hazardous communication, which really includes the safety data sheets for any hazardous materials hazardous chemicals that individuals might be working with. That's often something that might be overlooked. And then there's also things like noise and heat exposure, respiratory protection, confined spaces. It just really depends on the type of industry and what type of positions are working. But that is, and I missed lockout tagout for your machinery. If you're have any faulty issues, making sure that you're locking out and tagging out your machinery. All those things are really important. So it does cover a big gamut when you're talking about shift-based as well as manufacturing specifically.
Absolutely. I was listening to a podcast about how there's kind of a horror story of a company where they weren't actually tracking OSHA regulations. They weren't logging it in their 300 OSHA form. My question for you is, what are the implications if HR doesn't follow these regulations? Like, what happens at the end of the day?
Yeah. So when you're talking specifically about OSHA violations and their penalties, that can get pretty pricey. So a willful and repeated violation in 2024, they just upped them. I think it's like January 15th of every year, can be up to $161,323 per violation.
Oh my God.
Other penalties can be over 16,000, about 16,131 is the max per violation. And that can add up really quickly. And then if somebody just is told to make a fix and they don't make the fix, that can actually be added per day to the violation. So there's definitely a risk financially that way, but you also have to think about just things like the damage that might be happening with accidents and injuries that occur. The cost for your workers' comp injuries would be going up potentially due to more frequent or even more higher risk or higher level accidents or injuries. There could be, forklift drivers could damage product, or that could be pallets, that could be full racks of product, that could be a whole truck that could be damaged. So there's a lot of risk when safety isn't considered. And so thinking about that when you think about budgeting and those types of things, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon, is really big.
Yeah. And, on our side of things, obviously it's very scheduling heavy, right? So when employees need to swap out, swap in, they have a call out, there's something going on, making sure that obviously managers are approving the swap shift, but that employee who's swapping their shift is qualified to work that role. So whether in this case, like a forklift operator, if let's say forklift operator A needs to call out, they need to swap their shift with B, that forklift operator B is actually qualified to do exactly what's needed of them. And, we have these tools on the HR compliance side, on our scheduling side of things that of course allows that. And it's a huge, huge lift off of manager side of things on the admin side. So making sure that, the safety of it is covered across the ground. So with your experience in manufacturing and varying employee schedules, what are common compliance challenges that HR teams usually face in trying to maintain these standards and trying to kind of uphold these regulations?
And you hit it really directly there, Meredith, with the concern of especially shift-based when they are
Yeah.
using a skeleton crew and somebody or a few people are out, maybe they're on leave, maybe there's some vacant positions and they're having a hard time filling that late shift. How do they get somebody to fill in for that role and have the training? And a lot of times managers have to make that call. Do I just put somebody in who isn't fully trained because I need to get this done, or is safety the priority? And that's really a tough piece for employers to make those decisions when it comes down to the operational viability of that shift. Things like machinery breaking down, maybe a finger guard got broken off of a machine, and during the day you have somebody come in and fix it. That's not a big problem, but if they're not there to fix it, what do you do? And a lot of times employees will not say anything. They'll just put that guard kind of there, even though they know it's broken, and just keep working. And that could cause a lot of risk
For
for
sure.
that individual or others around them. So, or even the person that comes in the next shift, if it's not reported that there was an issue. So a lot of that is concerning. There's also concern of for late shifts, especially the fatigue, the stress, the lack of concentration when you're working those late shifts, those long hours. Sometimes people work 10 hours, 12-hour shifts, and they can get tired. They can also feel like those late shifts might be less structured.
Right.
So they might decide to play pranks on each other or have some fun. And you want to have a little bit of humor in your day, but those things can be very distracting, especially if you're doing something safety sensitive, you're working with machinery. So there's a lot more risk in those areas.
Yeah. And I like that you touched on managers kind of needing to make that call on, all right, we need somebody to obviously come fill this shift. We only have so many people that are qualified in whatever that qualification might be. Do we make that call? And understanding that implication of what happens if something goes astray. I mean, it is so important to know. And I love that you highlighted that, because the reality is, especially in today's labor market, where there's only so many people that can do so many things, and a lot of people are looking to upskilling and up training, which is great, but it could also only go so far to some extent. It's really important to note that. And this is kind of where compliance comes in, where we're starting to look to the DOL and we're starting to look to wage and hour laws and things like that that are keeping us in line. And it's hard to make those calls, for sure. Are there any specific OSHA requirements that HR should pay extra attention to when managing these safety protocols for, like you said, night shifts or even irregular working hours?
Yeah, the training and preparation for the key shift workers, it's really important that they get extra training, that they feel very confident, especially with those skeleton crews. If their manager's off and somebody comes in to help out, but they're not really the manager, do they have the appropriate training? So you have to make sure that you train more people than maybe you expect to train on particular positions. That's a big part of the requirement. Assessments of hazards, not only during the day, but at night. Things might be locked differently. There might be empty or empty areas where somebody's working by themselves. What if they're working by themselves and they get injured? Is anyone in the area? How would they know?
Yep.
These are different things that employers need to consider. They can't just consider what's happening during the day. They need to consider how the night shift's working, if there's different areas that they have access to, and then things like incident responders. Do you have enough people trained that know what to do if there is an incident? Do they, where the first aid kit is? Do they know about bloodborne pathogens? Do they know what hazardous chemicals somebody's working with so that they can counteract that, whether it's flushing it out or whatever the case might be, until 911 can be called if there is a more dire emergency. But there's a lot that needs to be considered for those shift workers to make sure that they feel comfortable, just because you don't have the full rest of the staff there on site. They have to be more self-reliant.
Absolutely. You touched on training, educating your frontline staff at the end of the day. And to backtrack even more from that, you also touched on how HR needs to wear so many hats. We're talking about bloodborne pathogens. Like, this is stuff that it feels like you almost need a chemist degree for. You need a couple courses under your belt. But in reality, that's just how hard it is to stay on top of these regulations, and how hard it is to teach others, let alone yourself, on kind of updating and staying on top of these rules. So feeds me perfectly into this next section, how to get frontline workers to follow these laws. So Liz, my question for you is, how can HR work with managers to actually have buy-in from these frontline staff, frontline employees, to adhere to these OSHA regulations?
It's a great question. It starts with management. It starts with leadership, actually. I'll take a step back. It starts with the leadership of the organization, and really organizations that have that workplace safety culture, that positive, proactive workplace safety culture, have their executives, their HR, their managers, and their safety leaders on the same page, all agreeing that safety is the top priority, and modeling those good safety practices and encouraging reporting of safety hazards. So it's really important that the leadership team really buys in first, and that they're all on the same page. Because if you have a couple managers, especially on night shifts, if they aren't safe, if they don't think safety is important, then their staff's not going to think safety is important. So it's very important that everybody be on the same page, and that be an expectation of leadership and management. And then you want to think about ways to encourage employees to be involved. You want them to report things. You want them to feel comfortable reporting hazards that they see, not only just instances when they happen, but if they notice something that could be fixed, taking initiative to report it, or just saying, hey, here's how we can fix this easily. Because a lot of times they have the knowledge of what's the easiest thing to do to fix something. So why not encourage them to report that information in, and have that available to your team to make those safety team to make decisions and move forward. So talk about safety, not as something we do to check the box, but we want to make sure that it's something that is done because we care about others. We emotionally care about you. We want to protect you. And that emotion is what moves the needle and creates that buy-in for the employees. When you don't control and lecture them on safety, and you say, hey, this is important, we want to make sure you're confident and comfortable and trained, then that's going to help. And then, as I mentioned, the or maybe I didn't mention it, but incentivizing people who report hazards and correct them. So reward those people who come forward and say, hey, here's something that we can fix, and here's how to fix it, and make that public. Because the more that you recognize them in public, the more other people are going to say, hey, I can get my CEO or my executive member to recognize me and know my name if I also do this. So all those things can help. Asking for their feedback is really important as well. So there's a lot of options, but it really does start top down.
Yeah, I love the fact of equipping these managers with the necessary resources and tools. It actually points beautifully to this next slide. If it loads for me, let's put it up here. There we go. So talking about OSHA's recommended resources for managers, if we look at a couple of these, looking at capital equipment and supplies, that's a pretty clear one. Staff timesheets, training, vendor information, safety data sheets, even injury, illness data, checklist, online database, access to safety and health experts, and then OSHA's on-site consultation program. I thought that last one was really interesting. And I believe that they offer a free consultation for them to come in and audit your processes as is. Liz, my question for you is, what tools should HR provide their managers, looking at this slide here, so they can support their teams at the end of the day?
Yeah, there's a lot listed here, and it's all very important, and they really have to have access to all this information and understand it. They have to understand what it all means. I think starting off with just a general safety operations manual of some sort that they can refer to tell them where to go for things that aren't urgent, so that they, especially those late shift managers who can't just walk up to HR and be like, hey, where do I get this? Having something that kind of guides them through everything is helpful. All the signage that we can put up, there's a lot of these things that can be provided via signage. So letting people know where the safety data sheets are, put a sign up, let them know here's where to access those. Letting them know where the processes are, or having the processes step by step laid out in front of them in their workstations or work areas is really helpful. Checklists are very helpful for managers, so that they can quickly assess, did we do all the things that we're supposed to do in this situation? Walking them through and making sure they have access to assessments, so that if there is an operational change that they have to make, they can quickly assess that operational change and determine, is there new protective equipment that they need to wear, new PPE? Is there some other safety protocols that need to happen in order for us to make this operational change that we need to do soon, if possible? So all those things are really important. But I think probably one of the things that I found, unfortunately, that happened was our late shift didn't have access to the instant report form.
Interesting. Yeah.
It was printed off in hard copy and locked in the HR office.
Oh, interesting.
And so just simple things of making sure that managers have access to all these documents at night that they might need access to. So putting them electronically as well as hard copies for instant reports, and allowing employees access to those as well, making sure that they're out there so that they can complete them whenever they see an incident or have a concern.
I love that. I think it really depends on the company. I mean, as you just said, for night shift, for example, it wasn't even clear that they didn't have access until it was lived through, right? Nobody knew that they weren't going to have access because the HR door was locked. And obviously they didn't have those like timesheets, those data points to refer to. So they didn't have it until they lived through it. So it depends on the company. It depends on what's needed. We rolled out our own safety inspection management feature that kind of has all of that, like in terms of checklists, assets, audits. Depending on what your organization needs, you can cater it to exactly what those points are that you need to be covering, that you need to be regulating a little bit more, self-auditing. So yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that's a bottleneck that a lot of HR people are running into. And it's a very common issue to not have a catch-all, right? To have that customized experience. So absolutely. Are there any training or education programs that you actually recommend to ensure that staff understand the requirements and expectations surrounding OSHA?
Sure. First, I just want to say, and I meant to say this in our last question, but I missed it, was we want to get creative on the training.
Yes.
Training needs to use different media. It needs to have change up of who's speaking or what they're doing. Even think about having some fun with it, making it not so dry, gamification. I know you don't want to have distractions while they're at work and doing their job, but when they're in training, you can make it fun. And things like quizzing them and having them compete to see who all know, which team knows the most safety protocol pieces of information, you can figure out how to do that. It can be one-on-one, it could be teams, it could be whatever you want, but making those types of things fun, making them want to learn is really important, and changing it up is really important. So that's a key to the training piece for your employees. But I would say there are lots of different training and education programs out there. SHRM has one, a safety management suite that's offered in partnership with JJ Keller. So that's something to look at. It helps create the safety plans, provides audits and checklists, as well as a lot of resources on the regulations and safety data sheets. So that is certainly one that I would recommend as well.
Nice. I definitely agree with the engaging aspect of these training protocols. If the employees aren't engaged, that they're obviously not even going to retain the information to begin with. It leads me to my next question. How can HR implement safety into their workplace culture just a little bit better? I know it's not necessarily a value that a lot of people take seriously, especially frontline staff. So what can HR do to kind of embed that aspect of safety just a little bit more?
There's a lot. So the ultimate goal is to create that proactive and positive safety culture. And as I discussed when we talked about buy-in, it really is that top-down piece is really what's going to create that total buy-in culture. Sometimes HR is not going to get the full buy-in from the executive team. They can still do things. They shouldn't just give up and say, well, we're done. They can still do a lot, and it just might not be as consistently supported. So you have to be a little bit more rigid in pushing for this and explaining the reasons why it's so important. Some of the things that HR should do is budget line for safety. That's definitely needs to be there. You have to do the training. You have to have ways to fix hazards and have a budget to do those things. Because if that is put on the back burner and not fixed right away, you're creating more of a concern for a potential OSHA violation in the future. You can recruit and screen for people who are safety conscious. So that can certainly be questions that are added for your recruiters to ask of all employees, even your leaders, as you bring them on. Consider asking those questions and making sure that you are considering whether a leader is going to be supportive of being safety first in their approach. Onboarding, of course, you have to start off with your new hires. First thing, you have to make sure that they feel confident before they start doing their job, that they understand the safety protocols. And it's really hard if they come in to onboarding and they're given training on safety and it's kind of with an eye roll or really fast, like they should know all this. So I'm just going to go through it really quick. A lot of people know it. They might be bored out of their, because they've gone over a lot of times, but there are people who don't, or they forget something, or your process is a little different. So don't assume that new hires understand and will work safely. Make sure that you provide that type of training throughout the process.
I guarantee repetition is key here, especially with safety. If an employee has gone through 10 different safety trainings in their lifetime, they're going to retain that information more than the person sitting next to them who's only gone through a couple. I mean, that's just basic, logic at that point. And it's something where you can't explain it enough. And as long as you feel your employees are still engaged by the end of it, you can't go over it, one too many times enough. This is OSHA safety compliance. This is absolutely key. For those who don't have compliance protocols or processes in terms of incident reporting and keeping accurate reports in place, I want to go into that a little bit for those who are building this up from truly from the ground up. So obviously, accurate record keeping is one of the major pitfalls that, lands companies in hot water with OSHA. So Liz, my question for you is, what are the key elements that HR should include in incident reports to ensure compliance with OSHA requirements?
Well, let me just start with explaining the different forms
Mhm.
because
Yes.
there's an OSHA 300, OSHA 300A, and OSHA
Yep.
301. And a lot of times people go, what the heck are all these forms? So the first one, OSHA 300, is where you log your recordable injuries and illnesses. And recordable is defined by work-related injury or illness that results in either death, days away from work, restricted work. Let me see if I can remember them all. Medical treatment beyond first aid, loss of consciousness,
Yep.
or it could be just a significant injury or illness diagnosis by a licensed healthcare professional. So
Mhm.
any of those situations, you have to record it on the 300 form. Now, there are some exceptions to that for small employers. So small employers that have 10 or fewer employees, and there's also some exempt industries that don't have to do this logging.
Yep.
So just check on that if you are a small employer or if you're in an industry you think might be partially exempt is what they call it. You're only exempt from the logging. You're not exempt from all of OSHA. So don't confuse that. And then there's the OSHA 300A form. Now, this is the one that's the annual summary. So it just takes all the information in the 300 form. At the end of the year, you just add up all the numbers, and that is what you post from February 1st to April 30th. It needs to be posted for the previous year. So at the end of the year, you put it all together in January, and by February 1st, you have that posted through April 30th. At each location. And then there's a 301. So OSHA has a 301 form, which is their incident report form for injuries and illnesses. You can use that form, or you can create something that's equivalent, but it has to capture all the same information. And what that includes is going to be a lot of employee details like their name, their gender, their address. It also includes information about the healthcare provider. If they received any assistance from a healthcare provider, then you have to list who they are, where they, what kind of information they provided. And then you need to provide a lot of information about the actual incident itself. So the date of the injury, the time of the day it happened, and then the details about what was the person doing before it happened, when it happened, what was the injury or illness, and what objects or substances were directly harmed the employee. So a lot of details are needed there. So it's really important to fill that out as soon as possible after an injury or illness. You certainly want to take care of the person's injuries first, but as soon as they're able to, that's very important to complete.
Absolutely. I want to highlight this next slide talking about the 7 essential elements of an incident report. And of course, as Liz said, it depends on the report. So guys, be sure to read the fine print. But in terms of kind of the baseline elements, we're looking at the basic incident information, name, the job description of whoever had this incident, the accuracy in terms of, no grammatical errors here, objectivity, no use of emotional wording, make sure it is very simple English, that there's no sense of siding with one party or the other. Incident legal considerations, identifying the incident itself. Again, go into detail here. That's very important. The cause of the incident, exactly what Liz said, what they were doing before, what was involved in the incident itself, the supervisor's signature, of course, and of course, confidentiality being very, very key here. Liz, just looking at these 7 essential elements, would you say it kind of covers the board for all 3 of those for OSHA reports?
It does. I mean, the biggest piece is confidentiality. Once you definitely don't want to share all this details and information with everybody else. So maintaining that those incident reports confidentially and only publishing information as summary, such as the 300A form. But when you collect these incident reports, making sure that you're collecting as much information and as quickly as you can. But the objectivity, I love that you address that because I think a lot of times people are emotional and they might start to try to blame people for these things. And that's not necessarily a concern or that's not necessarily the point of the incident report. The incident report is just to track the details and facts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How can HR implement effective record keeping practices to make sure that incidents or even near incidents, I think that's also really important to highlight, are accurately documented around the clock? So, as you kind of said earlier, those night shift employees are a little bit faster and looser with how they are around compliance. They don't feel like they're having a very watchful eye over them. So how can, HR actually have these record keeping protocols locked in tight around the clock?
I think the biggest thing is going to be training and
Mhm.
incentives. So incentivizing people to report their instances and hazards is really important. And then the training is going to be the biggest piece. So making sure that everybody understands these forms, they aren't
Mhm.
scared of them, they don't feel like they're too hard. You want them to be easy to complete and easy to access. You don't, if they're looking for them for half an hour and then they're worried that they're not gonna, they're going to lose time at work and not be paid for it. Any of those concerns can come into play. So making sure people understand this is important. This is a job related duty. This is part of your work day.
Mhm.
Go complete that form and here it is, and get those details as soon as possible. But yeah, the best thing to do is make sure everybody's trained, all your managers and supervisors are well trained, and employees understand the form, and it's not a new thing to them, so that they're not confused by the information that's being asked about.
Yeah, and talking about giving employees autonomy over, these forms, understanding that this is information that can, in our case, in Workforce's case, be quite literally in the palm of their hand. Our inspection feature allows for that, where, it's a once-off audit, and it allows managers to actually keep that record around the clock, right, of maintenance that's been greenlit, of issues that have occurred, anything like that. So HR, yes, of course, it's important that they're there on site. But at the same time, especially in today's post-COVID world, that's not always the case. So making sure that there's always somebody reporting live on the scene, they have the information, they can take a picture on their phone, whatever it might be. So yeah, giving employees autonomy and giving that important training to know this is where the form is, this is where you find it, and here's what you do when something happens, when the incident occurs. So let's say an incident occurs. What should be the first immediate steps taken?
This is a great question. Well, of course, the first thing is employees' health and safety. So
Mhm.
whoever's first on the scene wants to determine, do we need to call 911 for any injuries or illnesses, or if there's a death or something to that effect, then certainly contacting the authorities is very important.
Yeah.
If it's just first aid or anything, making sure that you provide that as soon as possible, and take care of that individual, and then encourage them to seek medical treatment from a healthcare provider as well. A second priority would be securing the scene. So especially if for a bigger injury or accident, you want to make sure that think of yourself as CSI or something, whatever you
Right.
want. But you want to make sure that you block off that area, you lock out and tag out any equipment that might be faulty, or anything to that effect.
Mhm.
If it's, a slip and fall, if there's water on the floor, anything to that effect, making sure people don't repeat the same issue over in the same, the same day or later the next day. So securing that scene, not only for the safety right then, but also to do an investigation, because you want to make sure what did things look like when it happened,
Mhm.
so you can see exactly what concerns there might be in that workspace. You don't want people cleaning up the work area. And then completing the incident reports as soon as possible. So you have to weigh making sure that the person's healthy and safe and can take care of themselves. But then as soon as you feel like they're stable and everything's good, go ahead and have them fill out that incident report while things are fresh and clear and new. If
Mhm.
you wait a day or two, they're going to forget details and things like that. Have them complete their incident report. If they think of details later, that's okay. You can add to it and update the report as needed, but
Yeah.
have them complete that with as much facts and information as you can get as soon as possible.
Of those steps, what would you say is overlooked by HR? What are some instances where they've missed the mark even whenever they're filling out these reports that you've seen?
I think that of those 3 steps, the last 2 are overlooked. Usually people think about the person, that hopefully they're thinking about the person and taking care of them. But there are times when employees will also pretend like they're fine,
Yeah.
because they don't want an instant report. They feel embarrassed.
Mhm.
So it could be all 3. So I would make sure that you're checking on all 3 issues. If you think the person might be injured, even if they're saying they're not, encourage them to seek a healthcare provider later. Maybe they don't feel hurt right now, but when they go home and they start to get bruising or something hurts worse later, make sure you still follow the same processes. Even if they say, I'm fine, I don't need any help with
Right.
anything, it's an incident, it's an illness, let's move forward with the process. Securing the scene is easily something that can be overlooked, as well as a lot of times people just don't want to fill out that darn instant report.
Yep.
So that could be, given to somebody in the heat of the moment, and then it's lost. So,
Yeah.
so keeping track of all 3 of those is really important pieces, and all can be overlooked very easily.
So how can HR actually make sure that their employees feel comfortable to fill out those incidents or even the near misses?
Yeah, that's as I mentioned before, making it as easy as possible, making the
Yeah.
form accessible. They
Mhm.
have to be able to find the form, right?
Yep.
So we want them to complete that, for shift workers, making sure that it's not only online, but there's hard copies available.
Yeah.
Allow people to complete and report issues anonymously is something that a lot of employers will suggest.
Oh,
And that is more for those kind of smaller situations, not obviously a bigger issue. Everybody's going to
sure.
know what happened. But sometimes allowing them to report things anonymously, um, make sure that they don't feel like they might get reprimanded or lose their job for reporting those instances. And also make sure you hear about it when it is hopefully smaller,
Yeah.
versus when it becomes a bigger issue, so you can correct the mistake or correct the any potential safety concerns.
Right.
Let's see, what else can we think of? Make sure you respond to those instant reports. If you don't investigate and respond
No, it's such
and
a
take
good
action,
point. Yep.
people are going to be like, what's the point? Why do I
Yeah.
fill this out if nobody's going to do anything? So you have to respond, and you have to make sure that you're taking action in a timely manner. You don't want to leave something that's a safety issue and other people are potentially going to get hurt or injured
Right.
or worse, there for weeks or months for people to have to work around.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think asking for input from your employees is really important.
Yes.
Um, if you go in and fix something and you make it harder for them to do their job, unnecessarily, sometimes you have to put in a safety protocol that's going to add an extra step or some more PPE or something is necessary. But sometimes there's a way that the job can be done, in a safe way without those unnecessary steps. And talking with the employees that are actually performing the job is the best way to get that feedback and find out, is this really the best option? They
Mhm.
might have some suggestions that are cutting corners or things like that. And HR and management's going to have to say, no, this is the way we have to go. But if you don't ask them, they're going to just pick apart your decisions
Sure.
anyway. So ask for their opinion, explain if you don't follow the processes that they suggest,
Yeah.
why that process was decided that it wasn't the best option, and move forward. And then I think it's worth mentioning here that I mentioned safety incentives. Just be careful with those safety incentives that they don't conflict with the need to report instances. So you don't want to have safety incentives. Used to be a big thing. Give them safety incentives if there's been no safety issues for this month or this year or whatever. That just creates a peer pressure situation where people don't want to report. So all those things are really important. And then the biggest thing I think is just having that safety culture, where there's a trust that you can report and people will take it seriously and act on it and not turn it around as you're complaining or you're trying to make a bigger deal of things that are there. So making sure that it's, there's a trust there that this process is important and prioritized.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that trust is built within those conversations that you mentioned, having with your staff, right? Making sure that they understand what's required of them, what's expected of them, and in turn, hopefully they'll respond in a similar respect.
Yep.
I would love to end on my favorite question to ask all my guests. What are 1 or 2 top tips, actions, or takeaways our audience can leave with in this case to better prevent OSHA lawsuits?
There's so many. I'm going to try to reduce it down. So I think the biggest one that I hit on a couple times is that training piece. So just making sure that with training, we're making it creative, we're making it different, we're doing things to catch their attention, and make it something they remember and they want to remember. So that I think is a big piece. On the buy-in, as we mentioned, trust of a company leadership that they will do the right thing is really, really important. Connecting with employees emotionally and letting them know that their safety is your priority is crucial to them feeling that they can trust the company to act appropriately when they receive feedback, whether that is an incident report, whether that is reporting a hazard potential, any of those things. I think those 2 pieces of the puzzle are really, really important and could really help an organization take it to that next step, beyond just we do what OSHA says we have to do and we don't go further than that.
Right. Integrating it more just within the company culture itself. I think that's great. Liz, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, obviously this topic is always prevalent, not only just coming into 2024. So thank you so much for coming on and just sharing some amazing insights, some personal experience, especially within that manufacturing industry. I so appreciate your time and just your knowledge on the topic.
My pleasure. It was great being here.
Yeah, of course. And to those who are watching, if you want to check out more content like this, be sure to check out our channel. We have so much webinars on there. So be sure to check it out. And until next time, I will see you at the next webinar.